Everything we have been taught about the origin of our species is a lie designed to keep us calm. Beneath the desert sands, under the weight of the oceans, and inside the silent cores of ancient mountains, impossible evidence is surfacing. It suggests that our history did not begin with the first cities we were told to admire. It began long before. We are not the first masters of this world. We are merely the seventh iteration of a story that has already been told and erased 6 times before. Each world climbed to heights we can barely imagine before being surgically removed from the timeline. One artifact that predates humanity could be dismissed. But when these anomalies appear everywhere, the pattern becomes a scream. History is not a line. It is a cycle, and if 6 worlds fell before ours, what is waiting for us at the next turning? To understand where we are going, we must first accept that we have been here before. We have been taught that history is a straight line, a steady climb from the dirt to the stars. We are told that our ancestors were primitive, that their tools were simple, and that their minds were focused only on survival. But this story is a thin veil draped over a much larger and much older reality. History is not a line. It is a circle, or more accurately, it is a spiral that returns to the same point of crisis every few thousand years. We are not the first to build cities. We are not the first to map the heavens. We are the 7th civilization to rise on this planet, and the 6 that came before us were erased with precision that should haunt every step we take. The proof is not hidden. It is simply ignored. It sits in the layers of the earth that geologists call anomalies. It is found in coal seams formed 300 million years before the first humans supposedly walked the earth, where miners find iron pots and gold chains embedded in solid rock. It is found in limestone quarries where workers break open stone to reveal metallic cubes with edges so perfect they could only be the product of machining. These artifacts are not mistakes. They are witnesses. They are the shattered fragments of worlds that reach the peak of their power and then vanish into the silence of the deep past. If you look closely at the timeline of our world, you will see that it does not flow smoothly. It breaks. It fractures into 7 distinct chapters. Each chapter begins with a rise, reaches a golden age of complexity, and then ends a sudden, violent reset. We call these the 7 civilizations. Our world, the one of digital networks and global trade, is merely the latest. We are the 7th, and like the 6 that came before us, we are approaching a threshold that our ancestors knew all too well. The first civilization rose when the oceans were low and the land was vast. They were the architects of the deep coastlines, the ones who built the foundations that now sit hundreds of feet beneath the waves. The second world thrived when the Sahara was a lush paradise of lakes and rivers. The third conquered the frozen reaches of the north, and the fourth mastered the currents of the ancient seas. The fifth world reshaped the jungles into geometric empires, and the sixth, the one immediately before the Great Flood of Memory, built a global network of stone that we still find on every continent today. Each of these worlds was powerful. Each was unique, and each believed, just as we do, that they were the final peak of human achievement. They believed their walls would stand forever. They believed their knowledge was immortal. But they were wrong, because the earth follows a rhythm that no empire can command. It is a pulse of fire, water, darkness, and ice. A reset so total that it clears the stage for the next act, leaving only enough clues to tease the curiosity of those who come after. Why have we not been told this? Why does the official story of humanity begin so abruptly 6,000 years ago? To admit the existence of the first 6 civilizations is to admit that our own world is fragile. It is to acknowledge that we are not the masters of our fate, but participants in a cycle. Academic institutions and governments protect the narrative of a linear rise, because it provides the illusion of stability. If the public realized that 6 worlds had already reached our level of development and fell, the foundations of our society would tremble. We would have to ask the most dangerous question of all. What happened to them? The answer is written in the geological record, but you have to know how to read it. When you look at an ice core or a deep-sea sediment sample, you see spikes. Sudden spikes in ash and carbon, in isotopic signatures that indicate a world in chaos. These spikes are the fingerprints of the resets. They show us that the transitions between the 7 civilizations were not slow declines. They were flips. The climate did not change over centuries. It changed in a decade. The oceans did not rise over millennia. They surged in a season. This is a cycle of 7. It is the heartbeat of our planet. Every time the Earth reaches a certain point in its axial wobble, every time the magnetic field begins to drift, the stage is set for the turning. We see the signs today. We see the weakening of the magnetic poles. We see the erratic behavior of the sun. We see the shifting of the deep ocean currents. These are not random events. They are the precursors. They are the same signals that the 6th civilization watched with growing dread before the water rose to take their ports. But the most incredible part of this introduction to deep history is not the ruins or the climate data. It is us. It is the human being. Because we are not just observers of the cycle. We are the carriers of it, deep within our genetic code. There is a cluster of memory that refuses to die. It is why every culture on Earth, no matter how isolated, tells the same stories of a lost golden age and a coming destruction. It is why we feel a strange resonance when we stand before the great pyramids or the megaliths of the Andes. We are not looking at the work of strangers. We are looking at the work of ourselves in a previous life of our species. If we are the 7th civilization, then we are the ones who have the greatest responsibility. We are the first to have the tools to see the entire map. The first 6 civilizations left us their warnings in stone because they knew that paper and wood and digital files would not survive the reset. They carved their knowledge into the hardest granite and aligned it to the stars because they knew the stars were the only clock that would keep ticking through the darkness. They were trying to tell us that we are part of a sequence of 7. And as we step into this deeper investigation, we must be prepared to let go of everything we thought we knew about our origins. We must be willing to look into the darkness of the first 6 worlds to understand the light of our own. The fractures in the timeline are opening. The evidence is screaming from the depths of the ocean and the heights of the mountains. The cycle of 7 is turning once more. The story of the first 6 civilizations is not a story of death, but a story of inheritance. They gave us their blood, their myths, and their silent monuments. Now, as the 7th world approaches its own threshold, it is time to finally listen to what they were trying to say. Because the only way to break the cycle is to remember how it began. If 6 worlds fell before ours, we have to understand the mechanics of the erasure. It was not just one disaster. It was a strategic removal of complexity. Imagine a world as advanced as ours, with cities and networks and art. Then imagine the sun flickering, the magnetic shield dropping, and the atmosphere catching fire. Imagine the ice sheets sliding into the sea and a wall of water 2 miles high racing across the continents. This is what the survivors of the 6th world lived through. They were the ones who crawled out of the caves and began to tell the stories that we now call myths. But they were not just stories. They were data. They were the first pages of the manual for the 7th civilization, a manual we have only just begun to decode. As we move through this history, we will look at the specific artifacts that prove this advanced past. We will examine the genetic markers that show we are not who we think we are. and we will look at the suppression protocols that have kept this truth hidden for centuries. The 7 worlds are not separate. They are a single long conversation between humanity and the Earth, a conversation that is reaching its most critical moment. Welcome to the introduction of Deep History. Welcome to the truth of the 7. The past is not gone. It is waiting for us to catch up. And as the horizon begins to glow with the same strange light that the ancestors saw, we must ask ourselves one last question. Are we ready to be the first civilization to survive the turning, or will we become the 8th world's greatest mystery? The evidence is under your feet. The memory is in your blood. The cycle is in motion. Let's begin. To understand where we are going, we must first look at the depth of the grave where our story began. We have been taught that the first humans stepped out of the shadows of the Stone Age only a few thousand years ago. We are told that civilization is a recent invention, a spark that caught fire in the fertile crescents of the old world. But this narrative is a thin veil draped over an abyss of time so deep that it defies comprehension. Beneath the soil, beneath the rock, and beneath the very foundations of the earth itself, there are traces of a dawn that occurred millions of years before the first recorded word was ever spoken. This was the first civilization, the primal ancestors, the ones who saw the world when the continents were shaped by different hands, and the stars held different positions in the sky. Everything we know about this first world suggests it was not a primitive beginning, but a peak, a height of existence, so refined that nature itself struggled to reclaim the evidence. We find this evidence not in the pages of a history book, but in the fractures of the geological record. History does not crumble slowly. It shatters when faced with the impossible. One artifact that predates humanity by millions of years could be dismissed as an anomaly. One ruin that sits in strata older than mammals could be waved away as a mistake. But when these anomalies appear across every continent, in every layer of the earth, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. It feels as if reality itself is pulling apart the story we were taught, exposing pieces of something far older, far more advanced, and far more deliberate. The first civilization did not leave behind paper or wood. Those materials are far too fragile to survive the crushing weight of epics. Instead, they left behind objects that shouldn't exist. Objects that mock our understanding of the timeline. Deep inside a coal seam in the 19th century, miners broke open a block of ancient carbonized forest to find a brass bell. In another mine, halfway across the world, a perfectly machined iron hammer was found embedded in rock that was over 100 million years old. The handle was fossilized, turned to stone by the slow drip of time, but the head was made of metal so pure it resisted corrosion. These are the tools of the first ancestors. They were not carved with flint. They were forged with precision that speaks of a metallurgical science we are only now beginning to rediscover. But why were they left there? And why are they so rare? The answer lies in the violence of the first reset. The first civilization was not merely destroyed. It was erased. When the Earth undergoes a global transition, it does not do so gently. It grinds the surface of the world into dust. Tectonic plates shift, mountains rise, and the oceans roll over the land like a heavy shroud. Millions of years of geological pressure can turn a city into a thin layer of gray ash. It can compress an entire empire into a single vein of strange minerals. Most of what the first ancestors built is now nothing more than a chemical signature in the crust of the planet. But the fragments that survived are the screams of a world that refused to be forgotten. Even researchers who once mocked these theories now speak cautiously. They do so because the evidence no longer whispers. It screams from the depths of the oldest quarries and the darkest mines. They found spheres of metallic ore in Africa that appear to be machined, with 3 parallel grooves etched perfectly around their equators. These spheres were found in rock that is nearly 3 billion years old. 3 billion years. According to our official history, the Earth was a barren wasteland of simple cells at that time. And yet, here are objects that show intent, objects that show design, objects that suggest that intelligence did not evolve at the end of the story, but was there at the very beginning. This leads us to a terrifying question. If the first civilization was that old and that advanced, what was the nature of their world? Was it like ours? Or was it something we cannot even imagine? The symbols they left behind, found in the deepest caves and etched into the oldest stones, suggest a connection to the earth that we have lost. They did not build on top of the planet. They built with it. They understood the resonance of the stone, the flow of the currents beneath the soil, and the rhythm of the stars. They were the architects of the first blueprint. Every civilization that came after them, including the 5 that followed and our own 7th world, has been trying to recreate that original vision. We are all living in the shadow of the primal dawn. But as soon as these discoveries are made, they seem to vanish. The suppression of the first world is even more aggressive than the suppression of the 5 that followed. Documents are erased. Artifacts are moved to private collections. Access to the deepest levels of the minds is revoked. The people who maintain the official timeline know that if the first civilization is acknowledged, everything else collapses. If humanity, or something like humanity, was building and forging millions of years ago, then our entire concept of progress is a lie. We are not moving forward. We are simply waking up in a cycle that has been turning forever. The real shock comes when we look at our own biology. If we are the 7th civilization, then our ancestors were not just the people of the 6th world. We carry the genetic echoes of all of them, reaching all the way back to the first. Deep within our genetic code, there are sequences that do not seem to have an evolutionary purpose. They are dormant, waiting like a time capsule buried in our blood. Some geneticists whisper that these sequences are not mutations, but inheritances. They are the traits that allowed the first ancestors to survive the first great cataclysm. They are the reason we have an instinctive fear of the dark, a sudden intuition about the weather, and a sense of déjà vu when we look at certain ancient geometries. We are the vessel for a memory that is millions of years old. The first ancestors knew the end was coming. You can see it in the way they placed their final markers. They didn't build to last for 1,000 years. They built to last for eternity. They chose materials that would not decay and locations that would remain stable through the shifting of the poles. They left behind a map of the heavens that would only make sense to a civilization that reached a certain level of astronomical understanding. It was a test, a signal, a message sent across the ocean of time to whoever would be the next to wake up. They were telling us that the world is a cycle, and that the dawn always follows the darkness. What erased the first world? It wasn't just a flood or a fire. It was a total planetary reset, a moment when the Earth itself changed its skin. The magnetic field flipped, the atmosphere was stripped away for a moment of terrifying silence, and the ground became liquid. In that instant, the first civilization was folded into the Earth. Their cities became the strata of the next age. Their knowledge became the myths of the survivors, and their tools became the impossible artifacts that haunt our modern researchers. Every culture on Earth tells a story about a world that came before theirs. A world of giants, a world of gods, a world of light. For generations, these tales were dismissed as metaphor. But when ruins with identical geometry appear in layers of the Earth that should be empty, the myth begins to look like a memory of not one lost world, but a sequence of them. And at the very beginning of that sequence stands the first civilization, the primal dawn. They were the ones who saw the first sunrise of intelligence, and they were the ones who felt the first cold breath of the reset. The deeper you go into the story of the first ancestors, the more you realize that the fractures in our timeline are not random. They are strategic. They appear exactly where the evidence for the first world becomes too strong to ignore. It is as if something is trying to keep us from looking too far back. Something is trying to keep us focused on the last 10,000 years, so that we don't realize the true scale of what we are part of. But the evidence is surfacing. In the deserts, beneath the mountains, and on the ocean floors, the pattern is re-emerging. If 6 civilizations rose and fell before ours, then everything we call ancient is merely the first page of the final chapter. The ruins we admire are not beginnings. They are the last echoes of survivors who crawled out of the past. Their legends were not exaggerations. They were testimonies carved into stone, because paper and memory could not survive what ended their world. And all of it points toward the same question. If the first world was erased so cleanly, what force was powerful enough to do it? And why is that force beginning to stir again in our time? As we move forward, we must look at the transition. We must look at how the first world gave way to the second. The story of the first ancestors is the story of the seed. The story of the second civilization is the story of the growth. But to understand the growth, you must understand the soil. You must understand that we are walking on the dust of an empire that was older than the mountains themselves. The primal dawn was only the beginning. The shadows it cast are still long, and they are reaching for us. History is not a line. It is a spiral. And as we turn the next page of this forbidden record, we find that the first ancestors left more than just hammers and spheres. They left a warning. They knew that we would eventually find their traces. They knew that we would eventually ask the question. And they knew that by the time we found the answer, it might already be too late to stop the cycle from turning again. The evidence doesn't just whisper. It screams. And the scream is coming from the ground beneath your feet. The discovery of the first world changes the nature of the mystery. It is no longer a question of whether these civilizations existed. The artifacts prove they did. The real question, the one we were never meant to ask, is far more dangerous. Did something erase them on purpose? Was each reset a natural event, or was it an intervention? As we approach the threshold of our own world, the realization becomes impossible to avoid. Whatever ended the primal dawn may already be watching the seventh world rise. The past is not behind us. It is beneath us, waiting for the moment the cycle completes its turn. We are the seventh civilization, but we are built on the bones of first. And the first dawn is about to break again. This is the truth buried under 7 forgotten worlds. And we are only just beginning to uncover the first layer. The story is shifting beneath your feet. Stay with us as we descend deeper into the fractures of the timeline. The next chapter is not about the dawn. It is about the flood that followed. It is about the second world and the remnants of the first that tried to survive the rising tide. The patterns are aligning. The clock is ticking. And the earth is remembering everything it was told to forget. If you look closely at the oldest foundations on earth, you realize they are not the beginning of our story. They are the desperate signature of a world that refused to be forgotten. The second civilization did not rise from nothing. It rose from the wreckage of the first. And it built in stone because it knew that everything else would burn. We call it the monolithic age. But that is a name designed to hide the truth. It suggests primitive people moving heavy rocks with ropes and muscle. But the evidence screaming from the ground tells a different story. It tells the story of the architects of the second rise. People who understood physics, resonance, and the planetary grid in ways we are only beginning to rediscover. These were not the ancestors we were taught about. They were the survivors of a world that had already seen the end. When the first civilization collapsed into fire and water, the slate was wiped nearly clean, but the memory survived. Those who climbed out of the ruins understood a terrifying truth. Wood rots, metal rusts, paper turns to dust. If they wanted to warn the future, if they wanted to leave a blueprint for the next awakening, they had to use the bones of the earth itself. They turned to the stone, but they did not just carve it, they engineered it. They moved blocks weighing hundreds of tons with a precision that makes modern construction look clumsy, and they did it simultaneously across every continent, as if following a single global command. The first clue that the second civilization was advanced is found in the precision of the joints. In Peru, at the site of Sacsayhuaman, the stones do not just sit together. They are fused in a three-dimensional puzzle so complex that a human hair cannot pass between them. These are not square blocks. They are polygonal shapes with dozens of angles, each one matching the stone beside it with millimetric accuracy. To achieve this today, we would need computer-aided design and high-speed diamond saws. Yet the architect of the second rise did it with stones the size of houses. And they did it in a way that makes the structures earthquake-proof. When the earth shakes, the stones do not break. They move. They vibrate in resonance with the planet, and then they settle back into their perfect original positions. This is not the work of people with copper chisels. This is seismic engineering from a world that had already watched its cities fall once. But the mystery goes deeper than the construction. It is a location that reveals the true plan. If you plot the great megalithic sites of the Second Rise on a map, they are not random. The Giza Plateau, the ruins of Baalbek, the temples of Angkor Wat, and the statues of Easter Island all align. They sit on a planetary grid that follows the natural magnetic currents of the Earth. The architects were not just building monuments. They were building a network. Some researchers believe these structures acted as resonators, stabilizing the crust of the planet after the instability of the first collapse. Others believe they were part of a global energy system, tapping into the very power that keeps the Earth spinning. Whatever their purpose, the scale is impossible to ignore. At Baalbek, in modern-day Lebanon, the trilithon consists of 3 stones weighing over 800 tons each. They sit 20 feet above the ground, fitted together with perfection that defies logic. There is no ramp long enough, no rope strong enough, and no workforce large enough in the ancient world to move them, unless they weren't using muscle at all. This is where the whispers of the forbidden history become a roar. There are legends in every culture of the architects using sound to move the stones. Stories of priests chanting, of trumpets blowing, and of massive blocks floating through the air as if they had no weight. For a long time, science mocked these tales as primitive fantasy. But now, we understand acoustic levitation. We know that sound frequencies can lift matter. If the architect of the Second Rise understood the resonant frequency of granite and limestone, they wouldn't have needed ropes. They would have used the air itself. And the ruins show evidence of this. In the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, the granite beams are tuned to specific musical notes. When you hum at the right frequency, the entire room begins to vibrate. The structure is not a tomb. It is a machine built by a civilization that understood that the universe is made of vibration. The architects of the Second Rise also left behind a mathematical signature that shouldn't exist for their time. They encoded the dimensions of the Earth into their monuments. The Great Pyramid is a mathematical scale model of the Northern Hemisphere. The ratio of its height to its base is exactly the same as the ratio of the Earth's polar radius to its equatorial circumference. They knew the speed of light. They knew the distance to the sun. They knew the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle that takes 26,000 years to complete. To know these things, you don't just look at the stars for a few generations. You need thousands of years of recorded data. You need the memory of the civilization that came before. But as always, the most unsettling part is how this knowledge was handled. When archaeologists find layers that are too old or precision that is too advanced, the reports are often buried. We are told the Incas built the megalithic walls of Peru, even though the Incas themselves told the Spanish explorers that the walls were already there when they arrived. We are told the Egyptians built the pyramids with copper tools, even though copper cannot cut granite. The truth is being managed. It is being surgically removed from our history to keep the timeline linear. Because if we admit that the second civilization was more advanced than we are, we have to admit that progress is not a straight line. We have to admit that we are in a cycle of rise and fall. And if the architects of the second rise fell, then we must ask what happened to them. The collapse of the second civilization was not as sudden as the first, but it was just as total. The evidence suggests a period of long decline, followed by a final cataclysm. In the layers of the earth, we find a spike in radiation. We find vitrified stone, rock that has been turned into glass by intense heat. We find it in the deserts of India. We find it in the ruins of Scotland. We find it in the middle of the Sahara. Something happened that was so powerful it melted the very monuments meant to last forever. Was it a solar flare? A cosmic impact? Or did the architects of the second rise unleash a power they couldn't control? The survivors of the second fall did not have the strength of their ancestors. They retreated into the shadows, carrying the fragments of the old world. They became the priests. They became the keepers of the myths. They watched as the third rise began, but this time the knowledge was fading. The precision was gone. They could still move large stones, but they couldn't make them float. They could still track the stars, but they forgot why. The age of the architects was over, and the age of the kings had begun. Every culture on earth tells a story about these teachers. The shining ones, the builders, the giants. They are remembered as gods because their power was so far beyond the comprehension of those who came after. But they weren't gods. They were the architects of the second rise. They were humans who had reached a peak we are only now beginning to see. And they left their message in the stone. They knew we would eventually find it. They knew we would develop the technology to measure the precision they used. They were waiting for us to wake up. As we look at the monoliths today, we see more than just ruins. We see a mirror. We see a civilization that tried to cheat time. We see the fractures in the story we were told, and we see the patterns beginning to repeat. The magnetic poles are shifting again. The climate is oscillating again. The resonance of the earth is changing. The monuments are beginning to hum. It is as if the planetary grid is reactivating, waiting for the seventh civilization to understand what the second civilization already knew. The evidence is no longer a whisper. It is a scream coming from every corner of the globe. From the underwater ruins of Yanaguni to the buried pyramids of Bosnia, the architects left a trail that leads us back to the truth of our origins. We are not the first. We are not the smartest. We are simply the latest. And if we do not learn to read the stone, if we do not understand the warnings carved into megaliths, we will follow the architects into the silence. The earth is remembering. The grid is waking up. And the architects of the second rise are still speaking to us. If only we have the ears to hear the frequency. The monolithic age was not a step in our evolution. It was the peak of a world we were never meant to remember. And as the fractures in our timeline widen, the architects are stepping out of the shadows, reminding us that every rise is followed by a fall. The question is not how they built the monuments. The question is why they knew they had to. And as the seventh civilization approaches its own threshold, the answer is becoming more terrifying with every discovery. The second world did not just end. It was erased. And the erasers are still watching. If the first two civilizations were erased by the fury of fire and the grip of ice, the third world was claimed by the weight of the water itself. We call it the abyssal collapse, a moment in our forgotten history where the map of the earth was not just edited, but rewritten in a single devastating pulse. While we are taught that the oceans rose slowly over thousands of years, the evidence suggests something far more violent. It suggests a civilization that had mastered the coastlines, a world that lived where the deep blue now reigns, and a people who saw the horizon disappear in a roar that never ended. Everything we know about the rise of the sea is a lie told to keep our sense of stability intact. We're told that early humans were primitive nomads fleeing the rising tide. But the ruins sitting on the continental shelves tell a different story. They tell of perfect geometry, of massive stone blocks fitted with millimetric precision, and of harbor systems that would baffle modern engineers. These are the footprints of the third civilization, a world that flourished on the lands we now call the abyss. And with every sonar scan that is quietly classified, the evidence of their existence screams from the dark. The discovery of the third world did not happen in a library. It happened in the silence of the deep ocean. During routine mapping of the seafloor, sonar teams began detecting shapes that should not exist. Rectangles that span miles, pyramids that dwarf the structures of Egypt, staircases that descend into mud of the Mariana Trench. At first, these were dismissed as geological oddities. But nature does not build in right angles. Nature does not align underwater plazas with the constellations of the sky that existed 30,000 years ago. Researchers who have seen the unedited data speak of submerged cities that look as if they were frozen in time. They describe avenues paved with metallic composite that does not corrode. They speak of massive stone spheres positioned at magnetic nodes across the ocean floor. It is as if the third civilization was not just living on the earth, but was integrated into its very energy. They were a maritime empire that understood the pulse of the planet, and yet they are gone, wiped from the surface so completely that we now walk over their graves every time we sail the open sea. What could cause a collapse so total? The answer lies in the layers of silt and microglass found in deep-sea cores. It points toward a sudden displacement of the Earth's crust. A tipping point with the weight of the ice caps or a cosmic impact caused the oceans to shift. It was not a flood that arrived in inches. It was a wall of water miles high, traveling at the speed of sound. In a single night, the third civilization was pushed from the light of the sun into the eternal dark of the deep. Their cities were not just drowned. They were buried under millions of tons of sediment, hidden away as if the planet itself wanted to forget they ever existed. But the most unsettling part is not the ruins. It is the suppression. Whenever a research vessel finds something truly significant, the protocol activates. Satellite feeds are blurred. Divers are reassigned. Reports are mislabeled as natural formations. Why is there such a coordinated effort to hide the sunken world? Because if we accept that a global maritime empire was erased in a single night, we must also accept that we are not safe. The third civilization was more advanced than we are taught. They had global trade. They had acoustic technology. They had a unified language. And none of it saved them when the abyss opened. If you look at a map of the world today, you see 7 continents. But if you could drain the oceans, you would see the ghosts of an 8th. You would see the land bridges of Sunderland, the vast plains of Doggerland, and the mountain ranges of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. In all of these places, the sonar finds the same thing: ruined foundations, machined metal fragments, crystalline structures that still pulse with a faint, unexplained energy. These are the relics of the third civilization. They are the survivors who try to build higher, thinking they could outrun the water. They were wrong. The transition from the second to the third civilization was marked by a shift from the cold to the wet. As the ice melted, the survivors of the second world moved to the lush, fertile coastlines. They built a world based on a flow of water and the alignment of the stars. They were the masters of the sea, but their mastery gave them a false sense of security. They believed they had conquered the earth. They did not realize that the earth is a living system with cycles that do not care for the empires of man. When the cycle turned, the water they depended on became their executioner. Every culture on earth has a flood myth. We are told these are symbolic stories of rebirth. But when you look at them through the lens of the third civilization, they look like eyewitness accounts. They speak of the fountains of the deep breaking open. They speak of a mountain of water that covered the highest peaks. They speak of a world that was here one day and gone the next. These are not myths. They are trauma. They are the collective memory of the seventh civilization, remembering the death of the third. The artifacts retrieved from these depths are even harder to explain. Divers in the Mediterranean have found gears made of an alloy that should not exist. Explorers in the Pacific have recovered stone tablets with symbols that match the genetic markers found in our own DNA. It suggests that the third civilization was not just our ancestors, but our architects. They were encoding their knowledge into the very things that would survive the water. They knew the end was coming, and they tried to leave a breadcrumb trail for whoever came next. But the trail has been broken. The erasers, the forces that maintain the official timeline, have spent centuries ensuring that we do not look too closely at the seafloor. They tell us the oceans are a mystery, an unexplored frontier. They do not tell us that the reason it is unexplored is because it is a crime scene. A crime scene where an entire world was murdered by the cycle of time, and the evidence is still there, waiting. Think about the precision required to build a city that remains standing after 30,000 years of underwater pressure. Think about the mathematics required to align a submerged temple with a star that has drifted across the galaxy. This was not the work of hunter-gatherers. This was the work of a global power. A power that saw the same signs we are seeing now. The magnetic drift, the shifting currents, the warming of the deep. They saw it all, and they thought they had time. They were the sixth world before us, and they fell into the mouth of the abyss. Why does this matter to us today? Because the pattern is repeating. The indicators that preceded the abyssal collapse are returning. The poles are moving faster. The deep ocean currents are slowing. The crust is becoming unstable. We are walking the same path that the third civilization walked. We are building our cities on the same coastlines they once claimed. We are trusting in the stability that the earth has never truly provided. We are the seventh civilization, and we are ignoring the screams coming from the bottom of the sea. If you go to the places where the continental shelf drops off into the deep, you can feel it. There's a weight in the air, an echo of a world that was silenced. Some people call it a haunting. Scientists call it an anomaly. But the survivors of the third world would call it a warning. They would tell us that the water is coming back. They would tell us that the ground we think is solid is merely a temporary stage. They would tell us to stop looking at the history books and start looking at the floor of the ocean, because the truth is not written in ink. It is carved in basalt and hidden in the silt. It is written in the perfect circles and right angles that the sonar finds but the textbooks ignore. The third civilization was a world of light and water. It died in a moment of absolute darkness. It was the first time humanity realized that no matter how high we build, the earth can always reach higher. The third world left us a legacy of fear. It is why we are afraid of the dark water. It is why we have stories of monsters in the deep. Those are not monsters. They are the memories of a world that was swallowed whole. They are the reflections of a city reflecting the light of a moon that witnessed collapse. And as the seventh civilization approaches its own tipping point, the shadows of the third are beginning to rise. The erasers are fast, but they cannot hide the entire ocean. They cannot stop the ground from shifting. They cannot silence the resonance that the ancient monuments still emit. The third civilization is waking up, not as a living world, but as a ghost that refuses to be ignored. It is the fracture in our timeline that is growing too wide to bridge. And as we move into the next segment of this journey, we must ask ourselves a terrifying question. If the third world was the master of the water and still drowned, what chance do we have when the cycle turns again? The abyssal collapse was the reset that defined our current geography. It was the moment the earth took back the land and gave us the oceans we see today. But beneath the waves, the third civilization is still waiting. Their buildings are still standing. Their metal is still bright, and their message is still clear. We were like you. We were strong. We were certain. And then the water moved. The deeper we dig into this mystery, the more we realize that our history is not a climb, but a spiral. We are returning to the same point in the circle. The artifacts are surfacing. The DNA is activating. The oceans are shifting. The story of the third civilization is not just a story of the past. It is a preview of the future. And the erasers are watching because they know that once we see the sunken world, we will finally understand what is coming for ours. The weight of the truth is heavier than the weight of the sea. It is a truth that was never meant to survive. But it has. It is in the sonar. It is in the myth. It is in the blood. We are the seventh civilization, standing on the ruins of a world that thought it was eternal, and the water is starting to ripple. If the previous empires were masters of the deep earth and the iron forge, then their successors were something far more elusive. They were the ones who turned their eyes away from the ground and toward the infinite. We have been taught that astronomy began with simple shepherds looking up in wonder, naming the constellations after beasts and gods. We were told that the first true maps of the heavens were drawn by cultures barely older than the pyramids. But there's a fracture in that story, a gap where truth was never meant to survive. Beneath the sand of the Sahara, deep within the jungle canopies of the Amazon, and etched into the very granite of the Andes, there's evidence of a different kind of science. A science that did not just look at the stars, but calculated them with a precision that modern computers are only now beginning to match. The fourth civilization were the celestial cartographers. They did not just build monuments. They built clocks. Clocks made of stone and iron that were designed to track time across tens of thousands of years. We call them ruins. We call them temples. But if you look at the angles, if you measure the distance between the stones, and if you align it with the sky as it appeared 20,000 years ago, the temples turn into something else. They turn into instruments. Instruments designed to watch for the return of the very forces that erased the worlds before them. Everything we know about the fourth world is about to collapse under the weight of a truth that was never meant to survive. Impossible evidence keeps surfacing. Evidence pointing to a civilization that understood the precession of the equinoxes long before the first recorded human learned to write. One ruin that should not exist could be dismissed as an anomaly. One artifact that predates humanity could be waved away as contamination. But when these anomalies begin appearing everywhere, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. It feels as if reality itself is pulling apart the story we were taught, exposing pieces of something far older, far more advanced, and far more deliberate. The real shock came when researchers found a series of obsidian lenses buried in a strata of volcanic ash. These were not primitive ornaments. They were ground with such mathematical perfection that they could focus light with surgical precision. When placed within internal chambers of certain megalithic structures, these lenses would capture the light of a single star on a single night once every 26,000 years. This is not the work of a primitive culture. This is the work of people who viewed the Earth as a single point in a much larger cosmic engine. But the most unsettling part isn't the artifacts. It's the precision. These discoveries don't contradict history randomly. They contradict it strategically, almost surgically, as if something erased entire chapters, while leaving only enough fragments to haunt whoever uncovered them. The deeper you go, the more synchronized these fractures become. Patterns align. Timelines overlap. Civilizations we thought were isolated suddenly share impossible similarities. They all shared the same star map. They all watched the same corner of the sky. And they all left behind the same terrifying message. The sky is not a painting. It is a clock, and the clock is ticking. Every culture on Earth tells a story about a world that came before theirs. But the stargazers of the Fourth World didn't just tell stories. They carved the data into the bones of the planet. They understood that paper rots, wood burns, and memory fades. But stone stays. And if you carve the stars into the stone, the next world might have a chance to see what is coming. They mapped the magnetic drift. They tracked the solar flares. They measured the wobble of the Earth's axis with a decimal precision that we only achieved in the last century. And just as the reports began circulating, just as researchers prepared to announce a discovery that would reshape humanity's understanding of its origins, the documents vanished. Files were erased. Photos were corrupted. Access was revoked. The discoveries didn't just disappear. They were removed. And that raises a darker question. Who was fast enough to erase them? Who is watching the watchers? The fourth civilization understood something we are only starting to admit. The planet breathes in cycles. Long stretches of calm followed by abrupt and devastating exhalations. They saw the precursors. They saw the magnetic field weaken. They saw the poles begin to drift. They saw the stars shift their positions as the Earth began its slow, inevitable tilt toward the next reset. And they tried to warn us. They built the Great Pyramids not as tombs, but as anchors of memory. They aligned the stones to the belt of Orion, not because of religion, but because that specific alignment marked the beginning of the end of the previous cycle. But the suppression of this knowledge is as old as the ruins themselves. For generations, these alignments were dismissed as myth, symbolic warnings, poetic exaggerations, or imaginative metaphors. But when ruins with identical geometry appear on continents separated by entire oceans, when astronomical alignments recur in civilizations that supposedly never met, the myth begins to look less like metaphor and more like memory. A memory of a world that rose high enough to see the stars and fell so completely that only fragments survived. The strangest part is that their collapses were not random. They were synchronized across seismic layers and ice cores. The same catastrophic signatures repeat at near identical intervals. And in every collapsed layer, a silent question lingers. Why were these worlds erased so cleanly? It feels less like natural disaster and more like a reset. A reset so precise it suggests intention. And if the stargazers of the fourth world saw this coming, if they mapped it and measured it and prepared for it, why did they still fall? Perhaps they knew they couldn't stop it. Perhaps the monuments were never meant to save their world, but to serve as a lighthouse for ours. They left behind the geometry. They left behind the math. They encoded the truth into the very proportions of the human body and the architecture of our minds. The deeper we look into Earth's geological memory, the more a single unnerving pattern begins to reveal itself. Like the ticking of a cosmic clock, we never realized we were living inside. The same signals are rising again. Now, modern instruments detect the same precursors. The magnetic field weakens. The poles drift faster than any time in recorded history. Volcanoes, long dormant, rumble back to life. Even the night sky changes. These aren't random coincidences. They're echoes of the same precursors that appeared before each collapse of the civilizations that came before us. And if the pattern is re-emerging now, then the cycle may already be in motion. The only question left is how close are we to the next turning? If 6 civilizations rose and fell before ours, then everything we call ancient is merely the first page of the final chapter. The ruins we admire are not beginnings. They're the last echoes of survivors who crawled out of past collapses. Their legends of firestorms and drowning continents were testimonies carved into stone because nothing else could survive what ended their world. Until now, these parallels felt symbolic, but when viewed through the lens of the 4 civilization star maps, they snap together with terrifying clarity. The past is not a line. It is a spiral, and spirals always return to their beginning. So the question changes. It is no longer did these civilizations exist. The evidence is overwhelming. The real question, the one we were never meant to ask, is far more dangerous. Did something erase them on purpose? Is there a reason why the stargazers were silenced? As if each world was wiped clean the moment it reached a certain threshold of knowledge. And now, with our own world approaching that same threshold, one realization becomes impossible to avoid. Whatever ended the world before us may already be watching the 7th. The first forbidden star map wasn't found in a cave. It was found in the layout of a city that shouldn't have been there. A city buried under miles of Antarctic ice, or hidden beneath the silt of the Persian Gulf. A city where every street, every wall, and every tower was a reflection of the sky above. When geologists examined the surrounding layers, they realized the strata had never been disturbed. The city wasn't built on the earth. It was built as part of the earth. And the deeper they dug, the more impossible things emerged. Crystalline circuits that pulse faintly when exposed to the light of certain stars. Machining marks too perfect for human hands. Alloys that shouldn't exist. These were not the tools of early humanity. They were the relics of the celestial cartographers. And yet every artifact shared one eerie similarity. They were all sealed away deliberately. Sealed away from whatever future civilization might rise. Which leads to the question nobody wants to ask aloud. Who or what hid them? The next artifact was even harder to dismiss. A brass device found inside solid rock, with gears so small and precise they required a microscope to see. It was a computer, an analog computer designed to calculate the movements of the planets for the next 50,000 years. It was found in a layer of Earth older than mammals. To accept the artifact as genuine meant accepting something unthinkable. An advanced science existed long before the first recognized humans ever learned to carve stone. Scientists attempted to explain it away as a hoax, but the geological context was airtight. Each new discovery pushed the boundaries of human history further back until the timeline snapped. These were not random objects. They were tools, engineered tools, left behind by a civilization erased from existence. Yet even as researchers scrambled to study them, the pattern of erasure continued. Reports vanished. Artifacts were relocated. It was as if an invisible hand moved faster than the scientists themselves. If these tools belonged to someone, then where's the world that created them? The answer lies in the stars they mapped. They didn't look at the sky for beauty. They looked for survival. They knew that the Earth is a fragile vessel in a violent ocean. They knew that the cycle of destruction is as certain as the rising of the sun. And they knew that when the cycle returns, it doesn't just destroy, it resets. The fourth civilization was the one that understood the math of the end. They were the ones who saw the fire coming from the sky and the water rising from the deep. They were the stargazers who realized that we are not the masters of our destiny, but the subjects of a cosmic clock. And as we uncover their maps, as we align our modern satellites with their ancient stones, we are starting to see what they saw. We are starting to hear the scream that comes from every corner of the world, echoing the same impossible truth. Our civilization was never the first. And if we don't learn to read the maps they left behind, we will not be the last to fall into the silence of the forgotten worlds. Stay with us, like this video, so more people can follow the trail we were never meant to see. Because the next chapter asks a question even more unsettling. If our DNA remembers the past, then what did the monuments remember? And what happens when the clock they were built to track finally strikes midnight? The story is shifting beneath your feet. Follow us into the truth buried under 7 forgotten worlds. History doesn't crumble slowly. It shatters. And we are standing on the shards of the world that came before. If the first 4 civilizations were defined by their relationship with the stars, the oceans, and the subtle energies of the earth, the 5th civilization was defined by something much harder, something much heavier. They were the masters of the physical, the architects of the absolute. We call them the Iron Hegemony. Everything we were taught about the progression of technology, from the primitive use of stone to the slow discovery of bronze and iron, is a carefully constructed screen. A screen designed to hide a world that reached an industrial peak long before our species was supposed to know how to light a fire. The evidence of the 5th world is not found in delicate pottery or crumbling parchment. It is found in the deep veins of the earth. It is found in the way the very crust of our planet has been scarred, mined, and hollowed out in patterns that no natural process can explain. Researchers and miners across the globe have whispered about these anomalies for over a century. In the deepest shafts of the Ural Mountains, workers broke through a wall of solid quartz only to find a gallery of perfectly machined gears, some as small as a grain of sand, others larger than a human torso. They were made of an alloy that should not exist, a mixture of iron, aluminum, and rare earth elements that remains resistant to corrosion after millions of years. This was not a primitive tool. This was part of a machine. And that machine was buried in rock that formed during an age when the official story says the most advanced life on Earth was still crawling through the mud. The Iron Hegemony did not just inhabit the world. They conquered it. They were a global power that viewed the planet as a resource to be harvested, refined, and forged. While the 4th civilization may have lived in harmony with the rising tides, the 5th civilization attempted to build walls against them. They were the first to attempt a total mastery of the planetary environment. Their cities were not built with the organic curves of the earlier worlds. They were built with the cold, relentless geometry of the machine. We find their footprints in the strangest places. Deep sonar scans of the North Sea reveal the outlines of massive industrial hubs, grids of steel and stone that were swallowed when the land bridges collapsed. These were not fishing villages. These were refineries. These were the heart of a global network that traded in heavy metals and precision components long before the first pyramid was ever conceived. What makes the fifth civilization so unsettling is their familiarity. They represent the path we are currently walking. They were a world of expansion, of production, and of an iron that refused to acknowledge the limits of the planet. But the more they forged, the more they disrupted, the deeper they mined, the more they interfered with the internal rhythms of the earth. There are theories whispered in the back rooms of geological institutes that the iron hegemony did more than just mine the earth. They attempted to tap into the core itself. They sought a power that was absolute, and in doing so, they triggered the very reset that would erase them. The artifacts of the fifth world are the most frequently suppressed. Why? Because a copper bowl or a stone carving can be explained away as an archaeological curiosity. But machine iron bolt found inside a coal seam is a threat to the foundation of modern science. If the fifth world had reached an industrial age millions of years ago, then our own industrial revolution is not a breakthrough. It is a repeat. It is a ghost. And the entities that manage our history cannot allow the public to realize that our greatest achievements have already been surpassed and destroyed at least 6 times before. The expansion of the iron hegemony was not limited to a single continent. Their reach was planetary. We find their metallurgical signatures in the sediment layers of the Americas, the highlands of Tibet, and the frozen wastes of Antarctica. They left behind a layer of chemical traces that geologists call an anomaly, a sudden spike in refined metals, in heavy isotopes, and in synthetic compounds that have no business being in the fossil record. It is as if the Earth itself was turned into a giant factory. And then, at the height of their power, the factory stopped. The ruin of the fifth was not a slow decay. It was a shattering. Because they had built their world out of iron and steel, they were uniquely vulnerable to the one thing they could not control, the magnetic field of the Earth. The fifth civilization had harnessed electromagnetism on a scale we are only now beginning to imagine. Their entire infrastructure, their communication, their power, their very transport was tied to the magnetic stability of the planet. But the Earth breathes. The poles shift, and when the magnetic shield began to flicker, the iron hegemony did not just lose power, they lost their grip on reality. Imagine a global empire where every machine suddenly turns against its creator, where the very foundations of cities, reinforced with iron, begin to resonate with a frequency that tears them apart. The myths of the iron giants who fell from grace, the stories of the heavens turning into a forge, the legends of the world that was crushed by its own weight. These are the trauma memories of the survivors of the fifth world. They watched as their towers of steel were twisted by forces they thought they had mastered. They watched as the oceans, no longer held back by their massive seawalls, rushed in to reclaim the industrial heartlands. The collapse of the iron hegemony left a specific kind of ruin. It left a world of scrap. Over millions of years, most of their steel rusted away into nothing, leaving only the red stains in the geological strata that we now mine as iron ore. We are literally building our seventh civilization out of the recycled remains of the fifth. Every car we drive, every skyscraper we build, every bridge we cross is made from the melted down bones of a world that thought it was eternal. We are walking in their footsteps, using their salvage materials, and making the exact same mistakes. Why were they erased so cleanly? It is the precision of the reset that haunts us. Nature is messy. Natural disasters leave behind a trail of chaos. But the end of the fifth world looks like a surgical removal. The most advanced sites were the most thoroughly destroyed. The most sophisticated machines were the first to be crushed. It is as if the reset is programmed to target the peak of a civilization's achievement. The higher you climb, the harder the Earth hits back, and the fifth world had climbed higher than any before it. Even now, as we push our own technology into the realm of the digital and the automated, we are triggering the same precursors that the iron hegemony ignored. The weakening of the magnetic field, the shifting of the poles, the increase in seismic resonance. We are seeing the signs, but we are blinded by our own pride. We believe we are the first to reach this threshold. We believe our iron and our silicon will protect us. But the fifth world believed that too. They believed their hegemony was absolute. And now they are nothing more than a thin layer of oxidized dust in the crust of a planet that has already moved on. The suppressors know this. They know that if the seventh civilization realizes that the fifth world was destroyed by its own technological hubris, we might stop. We might change. We might look for a different way to live. And that would threaten the structures of power that rely on our constant, blind expansion. So the artifacts are hidden. The deep-sea sonar maps are classified. The gears and the bolts found in the coal are melted down or locked in vaults where no one can ask the one question that matters. If they were so powerful, why are they gone? The answer is written in the stone. They are gone because they forgot that they were guests on this planet, not its masters. They are gone because the Earth has a limit, and when that limit is reached, the reset is not an accident. It is a necessity. The fifth world, with all its iron and all its fire, was nothing more than a fever that the Earth eventually broke. And as we feel our own world beginning to heat up, as we feel the same tremors in the magnetic field, we have to wonder how much of the iron hegemony is still waking up inside of us. Are we their descendants? Or are we just their latest iteration, destined to leave behind nothing but a new layer of red dust for the eighth civilization to find? The story of the fifth is a warning carved in metal. It is the story of expansion without understanding. It is the story of a world that thought it could forge its own destiny, only to be hammered back into the earth by the very forces it tried to chain. As we move closer to the next turning, the echoes of the fifth world are growing louder. They are screaming from the deep mines and the drowned refineries. They are screaming from the red stains in the rock. They are telling us that iron is not enough. Steel is not enough. Hubris is not enough. Because when the seventh world meets the same threshold that broke the fifth, it won't matter how high we have built. It will only matter how far we have forgotten. And we have forgotten almost everything. If the first 5 civilizations are distant whispers lost to the deep layers of time, the sixth is a scream we are only now beginning to hear. It is the immediate ghost, the world that died so recently that its blood is still warm in our soil. To understand our own fragility, we must look at the one that stood exactly where we stand now, the one that fell roughly 12,800 years ago. A world that did not just exist but thrived with sophistication that challenges everything we were taught about the Stone Age. History tells us that 12 millennia ago, our ancestors were primitive nomads. It tells us we were wandering the earth with flint tools and animal skins, barely surviving the harsh reality of the Ice Age. But the earth tells a different story. The earth speaks of a global maritime empire. It speaks of architects who map the stars with laser precision and engineers who move mountains as if they were made of silk. The sixth civilization was not a precursor to ours. It was the peak, a peak that was shattered not by a slow decline, but by a sudden and surgical erasure. And if we look closely at the fractures they left behind, we see a mirror of our own world staring back at us. The evidence is not hidden in secret vaults. It is hiding in plain sight, carved into the very foundations of what we call ancient. Consider the great Sphinx of Giza. Official history dates it to the dynastic period of Egypt, a few thousand years ago. But look at the body of the lion. Look at the deep, vertical fissures in the limestone. Geologists who study rainfall patterns have noted that these marks are not the result of wind or sand. They are the result of thousands of years of heavy, cascading water. Water that has not fallen on the Giza Plateau in significant amounts for over 10,000 years. The Sphinx was already ancient when the first pharaohs arrived. It was a remnant, a weathered ghost left behind by the sixth civilization to mark a spot on the earth that they considered sacred. And it is not alone. Across the planet, from the high peaks of the Andes to the plains of Turkey, we find stones that should not exist. At Göbekli Tepe, we find massive stone pillars carved with intricate animals and astronomical symbols. They were built at a time when we were supposedly unable to form permanent settlements. But the most unsettling part isn't that they were built, it's that they were buried. The sixth civilization did not just disappear. They intentionally entombed their most important sites under thousands of tons of clean earth. It was a time capsule, a deliberate attempt to safeguard their knowledge from the cataclysm they knew was coming. They were not building for their present. They were building for our future. They were the immediate ghost, trying to reach across the silence of 12,000 years to warn us about the cycle. The sixth civilization was defined by its relationship with the heavens. They didn't just look at the stars. They tracked the precession of the equinoxes, a cosmic cycle that takes 26,000 years to complete. To understand this cycle, a culture must have thousands of years of recorded observations. Yet, we find this knowledge encoded in the oldest myths of every continent. It is in the architecture of the temples in Angkor Wat. It is in the alignment of the stones at Stonehenge. It is in the mathematics of the Mayan calendar. The sixth civilization had mapped the clock of the universe, and they realized that the clock was ticking toward a 0 hour. They saw the precursors, the weakening of the magnetic field, the shifting of the poles, the arrival of cosmic debris in the upper atmosphere. They were sophisticated enough to predict their own end, but they were not powerful enough to stop it. What happened next was a nightmare that lasted over 1,000 years. It began with a flash in the sky, a fragmented comet striking the northern ice sheets with the force of 1,000,000 nuclear bombs. In an instant, the glaciers that covered half of the northern hemisphere turned to steam and water. Massive meltwater pulses surged into the oceans, causing sea levels to rise hundreds of feet in a matter of weeks. This was the great flood mentioned in every culture on Earth. It was not a metaphor. It was a literal drowning of the sixth world. Cities that once sat on fertile coastlines were swallowed by the abyss. Sunderland, the vast continent of Southeast Asia, disappeared beneath the waves. Doggerland, the land bridge between Britain and Europe, was erased. The sophisticated maritime networks of the sixth civilization were cut off in a single season. But the water was only the beginning. The impact was so violent that it kicked up a shroud of ash and dust that blocked out the sun for centuries. Temperatures plummeted. The world was plunged back into a deep, dark freeze that we call the Younger Dryas. This was the fire, and then the ice. The sixth civilization did not just die. It was pulverized. The survivors were scattered to the corners of the earth, stripped of their technology and their infrastructure. They became the wandering gods of our legends, the bearded teachers who arrived on distant shores, carrying the seeds of agriculture and the secrets of the stars. They were the remnant of the sixth, trying to restart the fire of civilization in a world that had gone cold. And they are the ones who told us we were the seventh. The sophistication of the sixth civilization is terrifying because of how much it resembles ours. They were a global culture. They had standardized systems of measurement that appear in the dimensions of monuments on opposite sides of the ocean. They understood the golden ratio and the geometry of the Earth itself. When you look at the stones of Pumapunku in Bolivia, you see machining marks that rival modern precision, right angles, inner grooves, and drill holes that suggest tools we are only now rediscovering. They were not using copper chisels and stone hammers. They were using something else. Something that didn't survive the fire and the water. But the most haunting evidence of their sophistication is not their tools. It's their warnings. They left us maps of the world as it looked before the ice melted. Maps like the Pyrie Reis map, which shows the coastline of Antarctica without ice. A coastline that has been buried under a mile of frozen water for thousands of years. How do they see it? How did they map it with such accuracy? The answer is simple and devastating. They were there. They saw the world before the reset. And they knew that the seventh civilization, our civilization, would eventually reach the same level of complexity. They knew we would build our own cities on the coastlines. They knew we would track the stars and develop our own technology. And they knew that the cycle would return for us. The immediate ghost is watching us through the stones they left behind. They are watching us ignore the same signals they saw 12,000 years ago. The magnetic North Pole is drifting faster every year. The sun is becoming more volatile. The climate is shifting in ways that our models cannot fully predict. We are approaching the same threshold that the sixth civilization crossed. The sophistication of their end was that they didn't just die in vain. They turned their entire world into a message written in the hardest granite and the most enduring myths. They wanted us to know that we are not the first, and they wanted us to know that history is not a line. It is a circle that is closing as we speak. The sixth civilization was the peak of human achievement before the Great Reset. They were masters of the planetary grid. They understood how to harness the energy of the Earth and the alignment of the stars. Their cities were built to resonate with the frequencies of the universe. And when they fell, the Earth was silent for a long time. 1,000 years of darkness followed their collapse. 1,000 years of forgetting. But we are the ones who woke up. We are the seventh civilization, born from the ashes of the immediate ghost. We have used their ruins as our foundations. We have turned their temples into tourist attractions and their warnings into bedtime stories. But the ghost is still there. It is in the precision of the stones we cannot replicate. It is in the DNA of the survivors that flows through our veins. It is in the silent, buried chambers of Göbekli Tepe. The sixth civilization had everything we have. They had art, they had science, they had global trade, and they had a deep understanding of their place in the cosmos. And none of it saved them. It didn't save them because the cycle is indifferent to our sophistication. The cycle does not care about our satellites or our skyscrapers. It only cares about the timing. And the timing of the sixth world's end was perfect, surgical, strategic. It wiped away the complexity and left only the fragments that would haunt us. We are now living in the shadow of that sophisticated end. We are the ones who found the metal cubes in the coal and the iron hammers in the stone. We are the ones who are scanning the ocean floors and finding the grid lines of drowned empires. We are the ones who are finally asking the question, if they were so advanced and they still fell, what hope do we have? The sixth civilization was the immediate ghost, the world that died yesterday. And if we do not listen to what the ghost is trying to tell us, we will be the eighth world's first discovery, a layer of plastic and glass buried under the mud of the next great reset. The end of the sixth was not just a natural disaster. It was a sophisticated conclusion to a sophisticated age. A reset so total that it required us to spend 10,000 years just to remember how to build in stone again. We are only now catching up to where they were. We are only now reaching the threshold. And the ghost is waiting for us there, waiting to see if we will recognize the pattern before the circle completes. History does not repeat, but it rhymes. And the rhyme of the sixth and the seventh civilizations is becoming a deafening roar. The immediate ghost is not a myth. It is our own future, reflected in the broken glass of the past. And as we stand on the edge of the same abyss, we must realize that the sixth civilization did not just leave us ruins. They left us a chance to be the first world that sees the end coming and chooses a different path. The sixth world ended in fire, water, and ice. But it began with a failure to remember. And we have forgotten almost everything, except for the feeling. The feeling that something is shifting beneath our feet. The feeling that the story is not over. The feeling that the ghost is trying to speak. We are the seventh. The immediate ghost was the sixth. And the cycle is already in motion. Every discovery we have uncovered, from the submerged cities of the Pacific to the genetic echoes in our own blood, leads to a single devastating realization. History is not a staircase of progress. It is a series of rooms, and we have only been allowed to see the seventh. Each room before ours was filled with the same noise, the same ambition, and the same absolute belief in its own permanence. And each room ended with the same door slamming shut. Scholars call this concept the Great Filter. It is the idea that at a certain point in the development of any intelligence, a barrier appears, a wall so high and so thick that no civilization has ever successfully climbed it. 6 worlds tried. 6 worlds failed. And now, the 7th world stands at the very same threshold, looking at the same shadows. The question is no longer what happened to the first 6 civilizations. The evidence of their existence is now undeniable. The real question is why they were stopped. Why does the timeline of Earth look like a series of aborted experiments? If you look at the geological record, you see more than just disasters. You see a pattern of precision. You see a slate being wiped clean with a thoroughness that defies natural coincidence. It is as if the planet, or something deeper within the mechanics of our reality, has a limit, a point where it decides that the current version of humanity has gone far enough. And once that limit is reached, the reset is activated. This is the mystery of the Great Filter. It is the reason why we find machined metal inside coal seems millions of years old, yet no machines. It is why we find city grids on the ocean floor, yet no written records of the people who built them. The erasure is too perfect. Natural disasters leave behind a mess. A flood leaves silt and debris. A volcano leaves ash and rock. But the collapses of the first 6 worlds left something else. They left a silence, so profound it feels deliberate. It feels like a surgery performed on the memory of the planet, removing the heart of civilization, while leaving only the smallest, most confusing fragments to haunt those who came next. Researchers who have spent their lives tracking these anomalies have begun to notice a recurring trigger. The filter does not seem to activate when a civilization is weak. It activates when a civilization is at its peak. It happens when the reach of humanity extends across the entire globe, when the technology becomes powerful enough to tap into the fundamental forces of the earth, when the monuments grow so large they can be seen from the heavens. At that exact moment, when the 6 previous worlds believed they were finally becoming masters of their destiny, the filter closed. Fire, water, darkness, and ice. The 4 horsemen of the planetary reset arrived not as accidents, but as a response. Imagine a gardener who allows a plant to grow until it begins to choke the rest of the garden. Then, With a single cut, the gardener removes it to the roots so that a new seed can be planted. To the plant, this is a catastrophe. To the gardener, it is maintenance. The Great Filter suggests that Earth operates on a similar principle. Each of the 6 civilizations before us reached a level of complexity that triggered a planetary immune response. They tapped into energies they could not control. They shifted the balance of the atmosphere. They altered the magnetic resonance of the ground. And in doing so, they signaled that their time was up. The evidence for this filter is written in the sterile layers of the earth. Between the ruins of the lost worlds and the beginning of the next, there are often long stretches of geological silence. Layers of rock where nothing lived, nothing grew, no tools were made. These are the cooling periods, the time when the planet recovers from the previous experiment. In these layers, the slate is wiped truly clean. The chemistry of the ocean resets. The atmosphere stabilizes. The magnetic poles settle into new positions. It is a planetary deep clean, designed to ensure that the next civilization starts with a fresh world, even if they are carrying the genetic scars of the one that came before. But why the silence? If these worlds were as advanced as the monument suggests, why did they not leave more behind? Why are we finding iron hammers in stone and brass bells in coal instead of massive libraries or digital archives? The answer lies in the nature of the filter itself. The force that erases a civilization targets its most fragile achievements first. Our modern world believes it is permanent because we have the internet, satellites, and massive cities of glass and steel. But in the eyes of a planetary reset, these are the easiest things to destroy. Glass shatters. Steel rusts and collapses. Digital data vanishes the moment the power grid fails. Within 1,000 years of a total collapse, every skyscraper we have built will be nothing more than a mound of red dust buried under new soil. The only thing that survives the Great Filter is stone and bone. And that is exactly what we find from the previous 6 worlds. We find the foundations. We find the megaliths. We find the skeletons of those who carried the ancient DNA cluster. The filter wipes away the ego of a civilization, leaving only the barest essentials. It removes the proof of their power and leaves only the proof of their existence. This realization brings us to the most terrifying part of the 7th civilization. We are currently approaching every single marker that triggered the filter in the previous 6 worlds. We have mapped the globe. We have tapped into the energy of the atom. We have altered the chemistry of the air. We have created a global network that pulses with the same resonance that the ancient builders once sought. We are at the wall. The satellites we have launched into orbit are the modern version of the pyramids. They are our highest achievement, and they are also our most visible signal to mechanics of the reset. Some theorists believe the Great Filter is not a natural disaster at all. They believe it is a conscious choice made by the survivors. Imagine the 6th civilization, watching as their world began to tear apart. They realized that their technology was the cause of their destruction. They saw the fire and the water coming, and they understood that the only way for the human race to survive was to let the civilization die. They chose to let the slate be wiped clean. They went into the caves. They climbed the mountains. They destroyed their machines and kept only their stories and their instincts. They became the hunters and the gatherers, so that we could one day be the builders. But if they made that choice, they also left us a warning. They built the monuments with impossible precision, so that we would eventually find them. They encoded the memory of the collapse into our genetics, so that we would feel a sense of dread when the signs returned. They wanted us to know about the filter. They wanted us to understand that there is a limit. The silence of the previous 6 worlds is not a lack of information. It is a message. It is the sound of a world that was forced to start over. It is a reminder that the slate can be wiped clean at any moment. As we look at the state of our current world, we can see the filter beginning to shimmer in the distance. The magnetic field is weakening, just as it did before the Fifth World fell. The oceans are rising, mirroring the end of the Fourth World. The sun is becoming restless, echoing the fire that took the second. We are watching the convergence of the same forces that erased our predecessors. The seventh civilization is no longer rising. We are hovering at the peak, staring at the same door that slammed shut on the six who came before us. The Great Filter is not just a theory. It is a historical record written in the language of extinction. It tells us that intelligence is common, but endurance is rare. It tells us that we are part of a cycle that has no interest in our individual lives or our national pride. The planet is a laboratory, and we are the latest test. If we cannot find a way to move past the threshold, if we cannot find a way to balance our power with the stability of the world, we will become the seventh layer of silence. We will be the ones whose metal cubes are found in coal seams by the eighth civilization millions of years from now. But there's a difference this time. We are the first civilization that has been able to look back and see the other six. We are the first to have the technology to map the filtered layers of our own past. We are the first to decode the message in the stone and the message in the blood. For the first time, the experiment knows it is an experiment. This knowledge is our only advantage. It is the only thing that might allow us to slip through the filter before the slate is wiped clean once again. The transition is happening now. The signs are no longer whispers. They are screams. The ground is shifting. The sky is changing, and the ancient memory is waking up. We are the seventh civilization, and we are standing on the ruins of 1,000 forgotten dreams. The Great Filter is waiting. The door is beginning to move. And as the shadows of the next cycle grow longer, we must decide if we're going to climb the wall or be crushed by it. The story of the first six civilizations is a tragedy of reaching too high. The story of the seventh will be decided by whether we have the wisdom to look down. The slate is never wiped clean by accident. It is wiped clean because the cycle requires a fresh start. And as the seventh world reaches its limit, the question is not if the reset will come, but if we will leave anything behind that the eighth world will finally understand. History is not a line. It is a circle, and we are very close to the point where the beginning and the end meet. The filter is closing. The slate is waiting. And the truth is buried under seven forgotten worlds, waiting for the one civilization that finally learns how to survive. Everything we are told about the Earth is a story of slow and steady change. We are taught that the ground beneath us is a patient diary, recording millions of years of gradual evolution, layer by layer, in an unbroken chain of sand, silt, and stone. But if you look closer at the edges where the layers meet, you will find something the textbooks prefer to ignore. You will find the scars, deep within the crust of our planet. There are moments where the diary of time does not just turn a page. It is torn out. These are the geological signatures of the six civilizations that came before us. They are not recorded in ink or paper, but in sudden spikes of ash, in layers of radioactive isotopes that should not exist, and in the strange silence of strata where life should be, but isn't. History does not just crumble. It is buried, and sometimes it is buried so violently that it leaves a chemical fingerprint across the entire world. When geologists look into the deep past, they often find what they call an unconformity, a place where millions of years of rock are simply missing. They tell us this is due to erosion or the movement of glaciers. But in certain parts of the world, these missing years are preceded by something far more sinister. A thin layer of microglass, of scorched carbon, and of rare metals like iridium that usually only fall from stars. It is as if the Earth was hit by a hammer, reset, and told to start over. And every time this reset happens, it leaves behind a scar. These are the echoes of the six. The first scar is found in the deepest ice. In the cores pulled from the frozen heart of Antarctica, there are layers of air trapped for hundreds of thousands of years. These tiny bubbles are supposed to hold a record of our atmosphere. But in 6 distinct intervals, the chemistry of the air changes in a single decade. Temperatures do not just shift. They plunge or they soar with a violence that defies natural cycles. In these layers, researchers find traces of pollutants that should belong to the industrial age. Yet they are locked in ice that formed long before the first human ever stepped out of a cave. This is the first echo, a world that reached a peak, poisoned its own breath, and was silenced by the ice that now preserves its memory. But the most unsettling evidence is found in the stone itself. Imagine a coal seam, formed hundreds of millions of years ago from the rot of ancient forests. It is a world that predates mammals, a world of giant ferns and silent swamps. And yet, when miners break into these seams, they find things that have no right to be there. A brass bell embedded in solid coal, a gold chain fused into a block of anthracite, a machined metal cube with edges so sharp and precise that modern engineers cannot replicate them without high-precision lasers. These are not errors. They are artifacts of the civilizations that rose and fell while the Earth was still young. They are the leftovers of worlds that were erased and then pressed into the Earth until they became part of the very fuel we burn today. When geologists encounter these objects, the protocol is always the same. They are labeled as anomalies. They are called curiosities. They are placed in the back of museum drawers and forgotten, because to accept them is to accept that our timeline is a lie. It is to accept that the Earth does not move in a straight line, but in a circle that has completed 6 full rotations before we even arrived. Each rotation ends with geological signature, so powerful it reshapes the face of the planet. Mountains are pushed up where oceans once sat. Continents are torn apart, and in the chaos, the evidence of the previous world is ground into dust, leaving only a few fragments to haunt the strata. The second scar is written in fire. Across the world, from plains of North America to the desert of Egypt, there are layers of sand that have been turned into green glass. This is not the work of lightning. This is the work of heat so intense that the ground itself melted into a liquid state. Mainstream science attributes this to asteroid impacts, but there are no craters. There are no impact sites. There's only the glass. And beneath that glass, researchers have found the foundations of cities that do not exist in any history book. Cities with street grids, with drainage systems, and with stones that show signs of being cut by heat rather than tools. These are the scars of a civilization that reached for the power of the stars and was consumed by it. A world that fell in a single day of fire, leaving behind only the glassy remains of its ambition. The third scar is the most terrifying because it is still moving. It is the scar of the magnetic flip. We are told that the magnetic poles of the Earth shift every few 100,000 years. It is described as a slow and natural process. But the geological record tells a different story. It tells of moments when the magnetic field weakened to almost nothing. In those moments, the shield that protects us from the sun vanished. And in the strata from these periods, we see a spike in mutations, a mass extinction of species, and the sudden disappearance of advanced cultures. The monuments of the six are often aligned to magnetic poles that no longer exist. They point toward norths that have long since shifted. They are the silent witnesses to a planet that has been turned upside down 6 times. And each time, the civilization that lived on the surface was wiped clean. The fourth scar is found in the chemistry of the soil. In the layers of earth that correspond to the great collapses, we find an unnatural abundance of rare earth elements. These are materials that do not occur in nature in such high concentrations. They are the components of advanced electronics, of high-performance alloys, and of exotic energy systems. When a civilization falls, its machines do not just rust. They break down at a molecular level. They seep into the ground. They become part of the sediment. If a researcher looks at a layer of earth from 12,000 years ago, they will find a chemical shadow of a world that once used technology we are only now beginning to understand. It is a ghost in the soil, a metallic memory of a sixfold past. The fifth scar is the water. The earth is covered in scars left by floods that were not caused by rain. These were meltwater pulses, moments when the oceans rose by hundreds of feet in a matter of weeks. We see the evidence in the underwater canyons, in the drowned coastlines, and in the massive boulders moved across continents by waves that would dwarf any tsunami in recorded history. Beneath these waves lie the remains of the fifth civilization. Their ports, their harbors, and their coastal empires are now part of the seafloor, covered in silt and forgotten by the sun. They were erased so cleanly that the only evidence they ever existed is the shared trauma of every human culture that tells a story of a great deluge. The sixth scar is the silence. Between each of these catastrophic layers, there is a stretch of geological time where nothing happens. There are no fossils. There is no pollen. There is no life. It is as if the planet itself went into a coma, waiting for the scars to heal before it allowed the next version of humanity to emerge. We are living in the seventh period of life. We are the seventh attempt. And all around us, the scars are beginning to pulse again. The magnetic field is weakening. The ice is revealing its secrets. The strange artifacts are being found in the strata once more. The earth is preparing to turn the page, and the scars of the previous six are the only map we have for what comes next. Why is this information so dangerous? Why are geological surveys classified? Why are independent researchers blocked from the most significant sites? Because if we understand the pattern of the scars, we understand that we are not the masters of this world. We are merely the current tenants. And our lease is tied to a cycle we cannot control. The evidence does not whisper. It screams from the rocks, from the ice, and from the deep sediment. It screams that we have been here before. We have built these cities before. We have reached these heights before. And every single time, the earth has reclaimed its surface, leaving only the scars to tell the story. As we look deeper into the strata, we see that the collapses were not random. They were synchronized with cosmic rhythms that we are only now beginning to measure. The timing between the scars is almost perfectly consistent. It is a ticking clock, and each tick is the end of an era. The sixth civilization left its mark in the stones of the high Andes. The fifth left its mark in the drowned cities of the Mediterranean. The fourth left its mark in the vitrified ruins of the Gobi. Each one thought they were the final chapter. Each one thought they had conquered the world. And yet, each one is now nothing more than a thin layer of dust in the geological record. We are the seventh civilization. But if you look at the ground beneath your feet, you are standing on a graveyard of six worlds. The mountains you climb are the ruins of their empires. The coal you burn is the fossilized remains of their forests. The water you drink has passed through their ancient filters. We are not separate from them. We are their successor, walking through the corridors of a house that has been rebuilt 6 times. And the most chilling realization is not that they are gone. It is that the same forces that erased them are now gathering beneath our own strata. The earth remembers. The stones remember. The question is, Will we learn to read the scars before we become one? The discovery of these geological anomalies is increasing across every continent, in every climate. The evidence is surfacing. A piece of worked metal found inside a geode that took millions of years to form. A slab of rock with a footprint that predates the first mammals. A machined rod found in a layer of volcanic ash older than the human species. These are not mistakes. They are the scattered pieces of a puzzle that, when assembled, reveals a history far older and far more terrifying than we were ever taught. They are the proof that we are part of a repeating cycle. A cycle of rise and fall, of memory and forgetting. Every time we find a new scar, the fracture in our timeline widens. We are forced to look at the world differently. We are forced to ask if our own cities will one day be a thin layer of microglass or a chemical spike in the soil for the eighth civilization to find. The earth is a patient witness. It does not hide the truth. It simply waits for someone to be brave enough to look down into the depths and see the pattern of the six, the pattern of the resets, the pattern of the shadows in the stone. We are the seventh civilization, and the geological scars of the six are the only warning we will ever receive. The straighta are speaking. It is time we finally learn how to listen. For decades, we searched the deserts and the ocean floors for the footprints of the worlds that came before ours. We looked for stone. We looked for metal. We looked for the geometry of ruins. But we were looking in the wrong direction. The most perfect archive of human history was never buried in the ground. It was never drowned in the sea. It was carried quietly inside us, hidden within the very substance that makes us human, our own blood. Everything we thought we knew about evolution is about to be challenged by a truth that has been hiding in plain sight, deep within the spiral of our DNA. Researchers have discovered a thread that does not belong to the story we were taught, a genetic signature so old, so precise, and so out of place that it functions like a fossil of a civilization we were never meant to remember. This discovery did not begin in a lab. It began with a question. Why do certain human populations, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, share traits that have no common ancestor in the fossil record? For a long time, these were dismissed as random mutations. But as our ability to map the genome improved, the random mutations began to look like a deliberate design. Geneticists call it cluster. It exists in less than half of 1% of the global population. It does not follow the patterns of migration. It does not track with climate. It does not appear in the lineages of the great empires that shaped our modern world. Instead, it is scattered like seeds in the most isolated corners of the earth. In the high mountain valleys of the Himalayas, among the Basque people of the Pyrenees, within the coastal tribes of Southeast Asia and the northern reaches of Australia. These people share no common language. They share no recent history. And yet, they carry the exact same genetic sequence. A sequence that predates the known separation of human groups. It is a signature that should have been lost to time. Yet, it has been preserved with a fidelity that suggests it was meant to survive across hundreds of generations. What makes this cluster so unsettling is not just its presence, but its function. These genes do not determine the color of your eyes or the shape of your face. They are a bundle of survival traits specifically tailored for a world in collapse. Individuals who carry this lineage show an enhanced resistance to hypoxia, allowing them to function in low-oxygen environments where others would fail. Their muscle fibers recover faster under extreme physical stress. Their metabolism remains stable during prolonged periods of darkness or sudden temperature drops. But the most staggering revelation lies in the brain. Scans of these individuals reveal heightened activity in the regions responsible for spatial mapping and celestial navigation. It is as if they possess an internal compass that does not point toward the magnetic poles of today, but toward the cycles of the Earth itself. They possess an instinctive ability to recognize patterns in the stars, to sense shifts in the atmosphere before they happen, and to navigate unfamiliar terrain as if it were home. These are not the traits of a species that evolved in a stable world. These are the tools of survivors. Tools designed for someone who lived through the fire, the water, and the ice of the 6 civilizations that fell before us. And they were passed down not as a random accident, but as a biological inheritance. A gift from the ancestors who saw their world ending and realized that stone monuments were not enough. They realized that if the truth was going to survive the next reset, it had to be written in the flesh of the children who would carry it forward. For thousands of years, this memory slept. It remained dormant, hidden beneath the layers of our modern biology. But now, something is changing. As our environmental conditions begin to shift, the cluster is waking up. Researchers are noticing that these rare genetic markers are beginning to activate in response to external triggers. Rising carbon dioxide levels, the weakening of the magnetic field, the acceleration of the polar drift. It is as if the DNA recognizes the signs. It knows the precursors of the collapse, and it is preparing the body for what comes next. People across the globe are reporting sudden spikes in intuition, a feeling of déjà vu when standing among ancient ruins, an unexplained pull toward the megalithic grids that span the planet. These are not psychological phenomena. They are neural pathways lighting up in response to a signal that is 12,000 years old. The genetic cluster is not an anomaly. It is a memory, a biological echo of a world that rose high enough to understand its own place in the cosmic cycle. A world that knew the 7th civilization would one day reach the same threshold they did. And they wanted us to have the tools to survive it. But as this data began to surface, the pattern of silence returned. Genetic reports that showed these anomalies were suddenly withdrawn. Researchers who spoke about the cluster found their funding redirected, or their access to genomic databases revoked. Private laboratories were acquired by unknown entities, and their archives were moved into restricted storage. The story of our blood is being erased with the same precision as the story of our ruins. Whoever is managing the suppression knows that the genome is the final frontier of the truth. If they can keep us from understanding what is written in our own bodies, they can keep us from understanding the cycle itself. They want us to believe that we are a new species, a unique moment in history, rising for the first time. Because if we realize that we are the descendants of 6 fallen worlds, then we will start asking questions that threaten the stability of the 8th. We will ask why the traits are returning now. We will ask why the ancient survivors chose to bundle these specific abilities. And we will ask what they knew about the future that we have forgotten. The truth is that we are not starting from zero. We are carrying a legacy, a genetic thread that connects us to the architects of the pyramids, the navigators of the submerged continents, and the watchers of the ancient stars. We are the survivors, and our DNA remembers the world that was lost. As the cycle turns and the signals intensify, the message in our blood becomes louder. It is no longer a whisper. It is a biological imperative, a warning encoded in our proteins and our neural architecture. We were never meant to be the 7th civilization to fall. We were meant to be the one that finally understood how to listen to its own past. For generations, we were taught that the mind is a blank slate at birth. We were taught that we only know what we are told and what we experience. But the science of epigenetics is revealing a much darker and more profound reality. Trauma can be inherited, knowledge can be encoded, and the experiences of 1,000 ancestors can be compressed into a single genetic switch. Imagine the level of catastrophe required to leave such a deep mark on the human genome. Imagine the fires that burned so hot and the floods that rose so high that they permanently altered the way our brains process fear and survival. The 6 civilizations before us did not just leave behind ruins. They left behind a blueprint for endurance. They left behind a map of the abyss, carved into our very cells. Now, as the magnetic field fluctuations reach a critical point, those maps are being consulted in labs where independent researchers still operate. The findings are terrifying. They are seeing changes in the way neurons fire in individuals carrying the cluster. They are seeing metabolic shifts that suggest the body is preparing for a radical change in the environment. It is as if an alarm clock set 12,000 years ago has finally started to ring. But why would someone want to hide this? The answer lies in the nature of control. A population that knows its own history is impossible to manipulate. If we know that civilizations rise and fall in predictable cycles, we will not look to modern institutions for salvation. We will look to the wisdom of the survivors. We will look to the patterns of the earth. We will look to the stars. The people who manage the suppression are not just hiding artifacts. They are hiding our identity. They want us to remain disconnected from the genetic thread that links us to the masters of the previous worlds. They want us to believe that our current technology is the peak of human achievement, rather than a fragile imitation of what once was. But the blood does not lie. The anomalies are appearing in children who have never heard of the ancient civilizations. They are appearing in people who have never seen a pyramid or submerged city. The memory is rising from within. It is an unstoppable force of nature. We are starting to see the world differently. We are starting to feel the vibration of the earth in our bones. We are starting to recognize the symbols that were once used to describe the heavens and the earth. This is the great awakening that the ancient survivors anticipated. They knew that when the cycle returned, their descendants would need more than stone. They would need the spirit of the sixth world to rise within them. As we move forward, we must ask ourselves what else is hidden in the 97% of our DNA that scientists once called junk. Is it possible that the entire history of the 6 lost civilizations is stored there, waiting for the right frequency to unlock it? Is it possible that we are walking libraries of forbidden knowledge, carrying the secrets of anti-gravity, acoustic engineering, and planetary resonance in our very marrow? The deeper we go into the genetic thread, the more we realize that the human body is the ultimate technological achievement. It is a vessel designed to survive the worst the cosmos can throw at it. It is a bridge between the worlds that were and the world that is to come. If you feel a sense of urgency, if you feel a connection to a past you cannot name, it is because you are carrying the thread. You are the evidence. You are the 7th civilization. But you are also the echo of the first 6. And the time has come to stop looking at the ground and start looking at the truth inside you. The cycle is accelerating. The magnetic shifts are intensifying. And the ancient memory is fully awake. We are no longer just observing history. We are becoming it. We are the survivors reaching out across time to meet the ancestors who paved the way. Stay with us as we continue to pull at the thread. In the segments to follow, we will explore the locations where the genetic activation is strongest and the secrets that are being uncovered in the blood of the few who still remember. The story of our origins is not a mystery to be solved. It is an inheritance to be claimed. And the 7th world is finally ready to hear the truth. Everything we call a beginning was actually a recovery. The story of our world does not start with the birth of farming or the first scratch symbols in clay. It starts in the silence after the 6th collapse. It starts when the fires of the previous era cooled. when the floodwaters retreated, and when the survivors looked out over a planet they no longer recognized. We are the seventh world. We are the heirs of a legacy we were never meant to remember, yet we carry it in every stone we carve and every dream we wake from. The rise of our civilization was not a slow climb out of the cave. It was an awakening, a systematic reconstruction of a blueprint that was already thousands of years old. If you look at the official timeline, humanity suddenly learned how to build pyramids, track the stars, and organize cities all at once. It happened across the globe simultaneously. In Egypt, in Sumer, in the Indus Valley, and in the Americas. No training, no trial and error, just perfect execution. This is the first clue that our world, the seventh world, was seeded. We did not invent civilization. We inherited it. The survivors of the sixth world carried the embers of their knowledge into the high places, the mountains and the deep caves, waiting for the earth to stabilize. And when it did, they began the recovery. But the most unsettling part of our rise is not what we built. It is what we forgot. For thousands of years, the seventh world lived in the afterglow of the sixth. We used their mathematics. We aligned our temples to their star maps. We followed the grid they had laid across the planet before the oceans rose. But as the centuries passed, the memory of the previous world faded into myth. The engineers became priests. The blueprints became sacred symbols. The technology became magic. We stopped being the heirs and started being the children. Playing in the ruins of a house we forgot we didn't build. Now, as our civilization reaches its own peak, the memory is returning. The artifacts that shouldn't exist, the genetic clusters that are waking up, and the geological warnings are all pointing toward the same realization. The seventh world is nearing its own threshold. We are approaching the same level of complexity and the same celestial alignments that ended the six worlds before us. And the erasers, the silent hands that move to hide the truth, are working faster than ever. They are not just hiding the past. They are trying to delay the realization of what comes next. The deeper we look into the foundations of our own history, the more we see the fingerprints of the sixth world. Consider the cities of the ancient world. When we excavate the oldest layers of places like Jericho or Ur, we do not find primitive huts. We find sophisticated drainage, standardized weights, and complex laws. It is as if the seventh world was born with a fully formed memory. But that memory was selective. We were given the tools to build, but the knowledge of collapse was buried. It was hidden in allegories of floods and sky fire. Stories meant to warn us without causing the panic that might stop our progress. Why would the survivors hide the nature of the cycle? Perhaps because they knew that a civilization lived in fear of its own ending cannot flourish. They wanted the seventh world to rise. They wanted us to reach this moment. But they also left a fail-safe. They encoded the truth in the only things they knew would survive a reset. Stone and blood. They built the monuments as clocks, timing them to the return of the stars that triggered the previous collapses. And they left their genetic markers in us, a biological alarm clock set to go off when the environment shifted back into the danger zone. That alarm is going off right now. The magnetic field is drifting. The poles are shifting faster than any time in recorded history. The weather patterns are breaking. And inside us, the ancient genetic traits are activating. People are feeling a pull toward the ancient sites. They're dreaming of the water rising and the sky changing. They are sensing a rhythm that the seventh world has ignored for 10,000 years. We are no longer living in the afterglow. We are living in the transition. The suppression of these facts is not a modern conspiracy. It is a protocol that has existed since the beginning of the seventh world. The earliest priesthoods, the first kings, and the secret societies that followed them were the original guardians of the embers. They knew that the seventh world was a temporary reprieve. Their job was to guide humanity toward the peak, to ensure we developed the technology and the connection needed to face the next cycle. But they also knew that if we learned the truth too soon, we would stop building. We would stop progressing. We would focus only on the end. But the end is not what we should fear. The end is simply the trigger for the eighth world. The six civilizations before us did not truly die. They transformed. They left their traces in the earth, in the monuments, and in our own DNA. They are waiting for us to join them. The real question is whether the seventh world will be the first to survive the turning with its memory intact. Will we be the ones to break the cycle of forgetting? Or will we become another layer of ash and mystery for the next world to find? Evidence of this transition is everywhere if you know where to look. The sudden bursts of innovation in the last century feel less like discovery and more like a download. We are reclaiming the knowledge of the sixth world at a rate that is statistically impossible for a natural evolution. The internet, the satellite grids, and the exploration of quantum fields mirror the global network that the ancient monuments hint at. We are rebuilding the planetary machine. We are reconnecting the nodes of the seventh world to the original blueprint of the sixth. But as the machine turns on, the planet responds. The Earth is not a passive stage for our history. It is a participant. The cycles of fire, water, darkness, and ice are the Earth's way of cleaning the slate, of resetting the energy for the next iteration. And we are feeling the tremors of that reset. The deep ocean currents are slowing. The mantle is shifting. The sun is entering a phase of activity that mirrors the records found in ancient ice cores. These are not random events. They are the heralds of the turning. We must ask ourselves why we are the ones alive at this moment. Why is the seventh world the one to rediscover the sixth before it? It is because we are the bridge. We are the generation that must decide what to carry forward into the eighth world. The suppression is failing because it can no longer contain the weight of the evidence. The anomalies are too frequent. The genetics are too loud. The Earth is screaming the truth that was never meant to survive across the ages. History does not crumble slowly. It shatters. And as the shards of our accepted timeline fall away, we are seeing the skeleton of a much older story. A story of resilience. A story of a species that refuses to stay buried. The six worlds before us were not failures. They were lessons. And the seventh world is the final test. Out of the embers of the sixth, we rose to great heights. We built cities that touched the clouds and networks that span the globe. But we did it on a foundation of silence. That silence is over. The rise of the seventh world was always meant to lead to this revelation. We are not the end of history. We are the stewards of a memory that is finally ready to be fully understood. As the patterns of the past align with the date of the present, the fracture in our timeline is closing. We are seeing the cycle for what it is. A spiral, not a circle. Every turn takes us higher. Every collapse brings us closer to a truth that no eraser can touch. If you can feel the shift, if you can sense the story changing beneath your feet, it is because you are part of the awakening. You are the descendant of the survivors, and you are the ancestor of the eighth world. The rise of the seventh was just the beginning. The real journey starts now, as we step out of the shadows of the six forgotten worlds and into the light of the truth. We are the ones who will remember. We are the ones who will carry the embers across the turning. And as the cycle completes its arc, we will finally understand what it means to be human in a universe that never forgets. The seventh world is not falling. It is transforming. And the eighth world is already watching from the edge of the embers. The only question left is how we will choose to meet them. Will we go into the darkness as children who forgot their names, or as the masters of memory 12,000 years in the making? The evidence is here. The patterns are clear. And the rise of the seventh world is reaching its final magnificent conclusion. The embers are burning bright one last time. The monuments are humming. The DNA is pulsing. The earth is turning. And we are finally ready to step forward. We are the seventh world, and we are no longer afraid of the dark. We are the ones who survived. We are the ones who recovered. And now we are the ones who know. The story of the sixth world before us is our story. And the story of the world to come is our legacy. The transition has begun. We have spent centuries believing that the story of humanity is a steady climb. A slow walk from the cave to the stars. But when you place the maps of the six lost civilizations over our own, the line of progress vanishes. In its place, a much more terrifying shape emerges. A circle. A cycle that repeats with the cold precision of a mechanical clock. History does not just repeat itself. It echoes. And right now, the echoes of the six worlds that fell before us are becoming so loud they are impossible to ignore. We are the seventh civilization, and we are currently walking the same path, following the same markers, and making the same choices that led every previous world into the silence of the earth. The most unsettling part of this discovery is not that we are falling. It is the realization that we are falling according to a script written thousands of years ago. The first pattern of decay is one that scholars call the complexity trap. In every one of the six civilizations that came before us, the end was preceded by a sudden and massive leap in technological reliance. They did not just use tools. They became inseparable from them. We see this in the ruins of the sixth world, where the architecture was not just stone, but an integrated energy system. They reached a point where their society could no longer function without a global network of resonance and power. Today, we stand in that same shadow. We have built a world that exists only within the wires and the air. We have offloaded our memory to servers. We have offloaded our survival to supply chains that span the planet. When the sixth civilization reached this threshold, they became fragile. A single disruption to the Earth's magnetic field did not just break their machines. It broke their ability to survive. They have forgotten how to live without the grid. And as we look at our own world, we see the same terrifying dependency. We are not more advanced than they were. We are simply the latest ones to reach the peak of the same dangerous cliff. But the decay is not just technological. It is psychological. Every culture that faced the great turning before us described a period of internal shattering. They spoke of a time when communication became a weapon, when the shared story of the people dissolved into 1,000 angry fragments. This is the second pattern, the social fracture. In the final years of the Sunderland Empire and the lost kingdoms of Sahara, the people stopped looking at the horizon and started looking at each other. They ignored the rising tides and the shifting sands because they were too busy fighting over the fragments of their own identity. This internal noise is a precursor to the silence of the cycle. It is the sound of a civilization losing its collective mind just as it needs it most. We are seeing this now in our own era. The global connection that was supposed to unite the seventh world has instead become a mirror for our own divisions. We are repeating the exact mental collapse that left the previous worlds blind to the arrival of the next cataclysm. The third pattern is perhaps the most haunting because it is written in the earth itself. It is the pattern of synchronization. For the six civilizations that came before, the end did not arrive as a single event. It arrived as a convergence. The magnetic field began to drift. The sun entered a period of instability. The deep ocean current slowed and shifted. Any one of these events would be a challenge. But when they happen together, they create a force that no civilization has ever survived. This is the trigger. And as we scan our modern environment, we see the signatures of this convergence returning. The magnetic North Pole is moving faster than at any point in human memory. The ocean temperatures are breaking records that have stood for 12,000 years. The sun is stirring in ways that match the ancient carvings found in the deepest ruins. The Earth is not reacting to us. It is reacting to the cycle. We are simply the ones who happen to be standing on the stage when the music starts to change. We must also look at the pattern of the erasers. In every prior world, there was a group that knew the end was coming. There was always a priesthood, an elite, or a council that saw the patterns in the stars and the earth long before the common people did. And in every case, their response was the same. They did not warn the world. They secured themselves. They built the mountain refuges. They prepared the hidden archives. And they maintained a protocol of silence to ensure that the transition remained orderly for them, even as it was catastrophic for everyone else. We see the modern version of this protocol in the restricted zones, the classified satellite data, and the quiet removal of artifacts from our museums. The people who maintain the official timeline of the Seventh World are not protecting history. They are protecting the same system of control that the leaders of the Sixth World used before they vanished into the mountains. The suppression of evidence is not an accident of academia. It is a feature of the decay. One of the most profound comparisons we can make is the shift in human intuition. The survivors of the previous collapses carried a specific kind of knowledge. They understood that the world was alive and that it followed a rhythm. But as civilizations reach their peak, they always lose this understanding. They begin to believe that they have conquered nature. They believe that their models and their mathematics have made them immune to the cycles of the planet. This arrogance is the final sign of a world about to be reset. The fourth civilization built massive waterworks to defy the rising seas. They believed they could hold back the ocean forever. The ocean proved them wrong in a single season. Today, we talk about geoengineering and climate control as if the Earth is a machine we can tune. We are making the same mistake. We are trying to negotiate with a cycle that does not hear us. There is also the pattern of the genetic awakening. In the years leading up to each of the 6 prior collapses, the survivors and their descendants began to experience a shift in their own biology. The genetic cluster we discussed in earlier chapters is not just a remnant of the past. It is a tool for the future. As the Seventh World approaches the same threshold, this cluster is activating in millions of people. It is a return of instincts that were dormant for 10,000 years. The sudden rise in sensory sensitivity, the heightened pattern recognition, the intuitive sense of direction, these are not modern disorders. They are the ancestral tools of the survivors returning to the surface. Our bodies are preparing for a world that our minds have forgotten. This biological mirror is the most honest indicator we have. While our leaders talk of progress, our DNA is whispering about survival. Consider the layout of our cities. When you look at the drone maps of our modern urban centers and compare them to the sonar scans of the drowned cities on the Sunda Shelf, the geometry is identical. We have rebuilt the same grids. We have placed our structures on the same energy nodes. We have even aligned our monuments to the same celestial markers without even knowing why. This is not because of cultural exchange. It is because we are operating from the same inherited blueprint. We are building the same world because we are the same people caught in the same loop. But if we are building the same world, we must ask if we are also building the same ending. The sixth civilization had their own version of the internet, their own version of global trade, and their own version of the elite. and all of it was erased so completely that it took us 12,000 years to even find their foundations. The pattern of decay always ends in a moment of absolute silence, a moment where the complexity of the world becomes a liability. In our current path, we have created a society where no one knows how to do everything, and everyone knows how to do almost nothing. We are specialists in a world that requires generalists to survive. If the grid fails tomorrow, the seventh civilization will collapse faster than any world that came before it. We have optimized for efficiency, but we have sacrificed resilience. The first 6 civilizations made this choice too. They chose the heights of the peak over the safety of the base. And when the peak crumbled, they had nowhere to go but down. As we compare our path to the past, one final question remains. Is the seventh world truly different? Or are we just the most recent version of a story that has already been told 6 times? The signs of the transition are all around us. The social fragmentation, the technological fragility, the environmental synchronization, and the institutional silence. These are the 4 horsemen of the cycle, and they are currently riding through every nation on Earth. We are not approaching the end of history. We are approaching the end of the 7th chapter. And if we want to be the ones who finally break the loop, we have to start recognizing the patterns before they become the events that erase us. The previous 6 worlds believed they were eternal. They believed their monuments would stand forever and their knowledge would never fade. We believe the same. But the Earth does not care about our beliefs. It only cares about its own rhythm. And as the pulse of the planet begins to accelerate, we are being forced to face the truth. We are not the masters of this world. We are its latest tenants. And our lease is coming due. The 7th civilization is at the threshold. The patterns are aligned. The cycle is turning. And the only thing that will determine our survival is whether we have the courage to look at the ruins of the past and finally see ourselves. Stay with us as we step into the next phase of this revelation, where we uncover the final signals of the transition and the specific event that triggered the reset of the world before ours. The clock is not ticking in minutes or hours. It is ticking in millennia. We have spent this journey walking through the ruins of 6 forgotten worlds, tracing the fractures they left behind and listening to the echoes of their final moments. But as we stand at the edge of our own timeline, the question is no longer what happened to them. The question is what will happen to us. Everything we have uncovered, every artifact, every genetic memory, every submerged city, has been leading to this single moment, the moment where the 7th civilization decides if it will become a footnote in history or the first to survive the turning. History does not crumble slowly. It shatters not from a single revelation, but from 1,000 small fractures spreading through the timeline like cracks through ancient glass. And right now, those cracks are everywhere. The reset of the 6th world was not a slow decay. It was a surgical strike by the planet itself. We have found the chemical signature in the ice. We have seen the magnetic record in the stones. It was a convergence, a sudden alignment of solar intensity and tectonic instability that turned the surface of the Earth into a chaotic landscape of fire and water. The 6th civilization had the technology. They had the monuments. They had the foresight. But they lacked one thing that we possess. They lacked a global nervous system. They could see the storm coming, but they could not act as a single organism to stop it. They were fragmented. They were divided by the very oceans they sought to master. When the final trigger was pulled, a massive solar discharge that weakened the magnetic shield and caused a crust to slip, they were looking in the wrong direction. Imagine a world where the sun does not just provide light, but acts as a reset button. This was a specific event that ended the world before ours. A solar flash so powerful it interacted with the weakened magnetic field of the Earth, causing the outer shell of the planet to shift. In a matter of days, the poles were no longer the poles. Tropical forests were pushed into the Arctic Circle. Ice sheets were shoved into the path of the sun. The resulting meltwater did not just flood the coastlines. It moved in a wall of water miles high, scouring the continents clean. It erased the cities of Sunderland. It buried the empires of Sahara. It drowned the civilizations of the Mediterranean. It was a reset so precise, so complete, that it left only enough fragments to haunt whoever uncovered them. And now, the same signals are rising again. These are not random coincidences. They are echoes. Our modern instruments detect the same precursors that appear before each collapse of the civilizations that came before us. The magnetic field is weakening. It has lost nearly 10% of its strength in the last century alone. The poles are drifting faster than at any time in recorded history, moving at a pace that suggests a flip is not just possible, but imminent. Deep ocean currents are slowing and shuddering as they're preparing to shift. Volcanoes that have been dormant for 10,000 years are rumbling back to life. Even the night sky is changing. Subtle variations that astronomers only whisper about in private, because the truth is too dangerous for public consumption. We are living inside the ticking of a cosmic clock we never realized was there. But there is a difference this time, a fracture in the pattern that gives us a choice the others never had. If 6 civilizations rose and fell before ours, then everything we call ancient is merely the first page of the final chapter. The ruins we admire are not beginnings. They are the last echoes of survivors who crawled out of past collapses. But we are the first civilization to reach this threshold with global eyes. We are the first to have the tools to see the entire map at once. We are not guessing. We are measuring. We are the only world that has ever looked back at its own ancestors and recognized a pattern before it completed its arc. This is our leverage. The forbidden knowledge that was suppressed for centuries is finally out in the open. It tells us that the cycle is not an execution. It is a filter. The pattern of suppression we have traced throughout this history, the disappearing artifacts, the erased files, the restricted zones, was not just about hiding the past. It was about controlling the future. Those who maintain the protocol know that a civilization that understands its own mortality is a civilization that cannot be easily controlled. But they also know that the cycle is coming whether we are ready or not. The Sixth World failed because they tried to fight the cycle with stone and ritual. They built walls against the sea and temples to the stars. They thought that if they could just endure the fire, they could keep their world intact. But you cannot fight a planetary reset with static defense. You can only survive it through transformation. We are seeing that transformation begin in our own biology. The genetic cluster we discovered, the ancient inheritance of the survivors, is no longer dormant. It is activating. In younger generations, we see heightened spatial awareness, a faster recovery from environmental stress, and an intuitive understanding of complex systems. This is not evolution in the slow, Darwinian sense. This is an epigenetic response to the returning signals of the Earth. Our DNA remembers the world before. It remembers the fire. It remembers the flood. And it is preparing us to navigate a world that is about to become unfamiliar. We are not just the observers of the 8th civilization. We are the architects of it. The final horizon is the moment where the 7th civilization must choose to integrate the lessons of the previous 6. We must look at the sunken ruins of Yanaguni and Varka and realize they were not just cities. They were warnings. We must look at the machine metal cubes found in ancient coal and realize they were not just tools. They were signatures. They were proof that we were never the first. But the most unsettling part is not the artifacts or the ruins. It is the precision. These discoveries do not contradict history randomly. They contradict it strategically, almost surgically, as if something erased entire chapters while leaving only enough fragments to act as a guide for those who would face the cycle next. What if the sixth civilization did not just fail? What if they recognized that their time was up and focused all their remaining energy on ensuring that we would succeed? What if the monuments, the star maps, and the genetic markers were not just desperate attempts to stay relevant, but a message passed through time to the only civilization capable of receiving it? We have the technology to monitor the sun in real time. We have the ability to map the magnetic field from orbit. We have the global communication networks to coordinate a response that transcends borders and languages. We are the first world that can act as a single planetary organism. The trigger is approaching. The indicators are red across the board. The climate is shifting faster than any model predicted because the models did not account for the cyclical nature of the Earth. But this is not a story about the end. It is a story about the transition. The previous 6 civilizations fell because they reached their peak and then plateaued. They stopped adapting. They became rigid. And when the Earth moved, they shattered. We cannot afford to be rigid. We must be like the water that flooded their world, fluid, adaptable, and capable of filling any container. We must move our infrastructure away from the coastlines. We must shield our electrical grids from the solar flashes. We must diversify our survival strategies beyond the fragile systems we currently depend on. If you can feel the story shifting beneath your feet, it is because you are already part of the 8th civilization. You are the one who is looking at the patterns and refusing to ignore them. You are the one who recognizes that the official story is a lie told to keep us calm while the clock runs out. The evidence no longer whispers. It screams. And every scream comes from a different corner of the world, echoing the same impossible truth. Our civilization was never the first, but it has the chance to be the last one that has to endure the reset. We can break the loop. We can bridge the gap between the 7th world and the 8th without the silence that followed the others. Stay with the evidence. Stay with the pattern. The artifacts in the stone and the memories in the blood are not there to haunt us. They are there to lead us. The final horizon is not an ending. It is a doorway. Beyond it lies a world where humanity finally understands its place in the cosmic rhythm. A world where we no longer fear the turning of the earth, because we have learned to turn with it. The 6th world before us fell, so that we could have the data to survive. Their sacrifice is written in the layers of the earth. Our response will be written in the stars. If this resonates with you, if you see the fractures in the timeline for what they truly are, share this knowledge. Someone else may recognize the signs they have felt, but never understood. We are the survivors of a history we were never taught. We are the 7th civilization, and the final horizon is here. The next chapter asks the only question that matters. When the earth finally flips and the sky begins to mirror the fire of the past, will we be ready to step into the light of the 8th world? The ancestors are watching. The cycle is moving. And for the first time in 12,000 years, the outcome is in our hands.